My day started with a self-administered COVID test, and it all went downhill from there. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Chaotic Bibliophile, and actually I was exaggerating for effect. It's been a nice day. It's just been intense, you know, one of those days where you realize you've gotten a lot done, you have a major headache at the end of it. That's sort of the vibe. That was my second self-administered test, so I am this close to freedom. And actually, by the time this video goes up, I hope I'm free already and I'm supposed to be on vacation. Hopefully that is the case because I am in dire need of vacations. Now moving on to the actual content of the video, I'm here to tell you about some of the books that I read in August. I don't know how many. I'll basically stop when it's time to stop. Let's start with a DNF. I've been DNFing not a lot, but like consistently one book per month, which I think is interesting. But I am very proud of knowing when to say no. And that happened with Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. I was so excited to read this because Liane Moriarty is constantly compared to Gillian Flynn, and I love Gillian Flynn. This is about a group of women in one of these suburban, I think Californian communities. It's told in retrospective, with people giving their testimonies because something awful has happened at one of these school events. It's supposed to be one of these like thrillers, murder mysteries that also comment on suburban America type of deal. The thing is that the writing is mediocre. It's just plain. There's nothing to it. I can see why this made a good show. I'm actually super excited to see the show, and I think partly that eagerness or that faith in this show made me DNF this even more quickly, because I was like, it's really just for someone who wants to picture this and not make any effort whatsoever. And for that, I can just watch the show, which I know has incredible actors and a great production value, but there's nothing to the writing here, which is why I DNF'd it. I am very offended by the comparison to Gillian Flynn, because Gillian Flynn is a great writer, not only in terms of what happens and not only in terms of her critique, but her actual prose is really good. If you have any recommendations as to where to go after having read and loved Gillian Flynn, but not being necessarily a thriller person, but sometimes wanting to read a thriller, I'm open to them. I'm thinking Patricia Highsmith because I have read some of her stuff and I know she's a good writer, and so maybe that's where I should be going. But if you have any suggestions, please let me know. Moving on to the books that I did finish. By the way, I will not be talking about the books that I read for Women in Translation Month, which I also read in August. I have already done a wrap up for that, and you can find that linked down below and in the eye as always. So the first book I finished was actually the final book for the Danny Peaks a 5-star TBR for me video / challenge. You can find it again down below and in the eye as always. She picked 5 books that she thought I was going to love, and she nailed it, and this was the last one I had to finish. I took my time with this one just because it is not super academic nonfiction, but it's also not general public either. It's about Oscar Wilde in the States, basically. It talks a little bit about him before going to the States on tour. He did a lecture tour, which started being kind of a flop, but would eventually make him into the celebrity we know today, which, you know, would eventually suffer the fall for which he is now considered sort of a gay martyr. But at the time, he was also a celebrity. He was one of the first modern celebrities as we think of them. And here Michèle Mendelssohn explains how that came to be, and specifically what conditions in the US allowed this to happen. I found this so fascinating. It's not the most readable nonfiction in the sense that it is done for people who are already interested in these sort of studies. It is, I think, by Oxford University Press, but I found it so fascinating. I love that it had so many pictures to illustrate the points, and also that her commentary spanned so many different aspects of the culture at the time. I learned so much about race relations and the role of academia at the time and class issues that were occurring not only in America but also in Britain, and the interrelation of those. It's just fascinating, and I recommend it if you're interested in Oscar Wilde himself, of course, or if you're interested in cultural criticism, sort of ideas of celebrity and race and that sort of thing. Then I want to talk about A Surprise, which was On the Road by Jack Kerouac. This was a reread. I have actually read this several times, but it's been a while since I last reread it, and I didn't expect to enjoy it at all. I thought it was going to be too male and too sexist and too indulgent, and it is all of those things, but I think in spite of it all, the writing is still really good, and it sort of still transported me to being that teenager who just wanted to escape. I just think there is value still in this book. I know why it might not be to everyone's taste, and I don't like the characters personally, because, by the way, in case you don't know, this is really an out-of-fictional tale. When Jack Kerouac initially wrote it, he wrote it with the original names, but they were changed as per, I think, the publisher's request. And it's adventures of him and Neil Cassidy, who is a very interesting case because he was like the patron saint of all the beats, but he was not an author, I don't think, or if he did, he wrote like one book that no one remembers anymore. Yeah, he talks about their adventures. A lot of other beats entered the game, as Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs, and of course a lot of the women. It's basically just that Jack, or Sal as the character is named, trying to settle down somewhere and then feeling restless, and then getting a call from Neil, also known as Dean, and just grabbing all his stuff and leaving. And I think something that I didn't appreciate, and something that usually gets neglected because we are all so busy judging how emotionally responsible and self-indulgent this is that there's actually a lot of sadness in the book. Jack, Sal, really feels disappointed by Neil/Dean often, and he needs to come to terms with the fact that he cannot really trust him and that he cannot really rely on him. The flaws that Sal inflicts on the other characters, Dean inflicts on Sal, and it's sort of a circle of toxicity that is more present in the book than we give it credit for. It's usually presented as this celebration of the road, while the book itself is more not an indictment, because there's still relish in the process, but a look into the heartbreak of that instability. So I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I was infuriated at many points, of course. I think I will want to look more into beat culture, but focusing on the women beats, of whom there were many and they were fascinating. Still, I think it's more profound than we give it credit for, and I definitely think the experience is different reading it now from when I was a teenager when I first read it. However, I still found stuff in it and I wasn't expecting to, and I still enjoyed the writing, which again, I wasn't expecting to. On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I also finished Notes of a Native Son by James Baldwin, which I really enjoyed, but of course you know this because you may have watched my spoiler-free review and discussion of this book already. If you haven't, I will link it down below and in the eye. As always, it was part of the low-key overdue book club, so go check that out to find out more. All I'm going to say is these were essays and I found most of them extremely successful. Now, The Hearing Trumpet by Leonora Carrington. Very strange. It's been tagged as fantasy, magical realism, surrealism. Of course, Leonora Carrington was a surrealist painter and she was amazing. I love her art. So I was really looking forward to this and it didn't disappoint. I actually really enjoyed it. It's just that I don't know if it's my thing anymore. I went through a surrealist literature phase and I was very much into experimental, transgressive, sort of visual poetry, all those techniques and all of those odd, for the shock value, nearly gimmicky techniques of all those early 20th century authors. But I don't know if it's my thing anymore. I think I prefer surrealism specifically in visual art more than any other kind of art. That said, I did enjoy this. It's about this woman who, I think she's 90 something, and she lives in a nursing home, and she gets a hearing trumpet as a gift, and she starts listening to conversations, and then it gets crazier from there. The writing is super good. I love the writing. It's sassy and dark, but still insightful. It doesn't apparently takes itself too seriously, but you can tell the work that's behind it. So I really enjoyed the writing. It's just that where it ends up, it's crazy, and you're either along for the ride or you aren't. And I think I was along for the ride for the most part. I may check out her short stories because I think this sort of very, very out there writing works exceptionally well in short story form. And I have read The Debutante, which is crazy. And if you want to know what Leonora Carrington is all about, you should check out The Debutante. So yeah, it was fun, it was well written, but I don't know when I'll read more like it. I also reread A Natural History of Dragons, which is the first book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series by Mary Brennan. This is a fantasy series where the protagonist lives in a world that is very much like Victorian England, except there are dragons. And she's writing her memoirs after she's become this very famous dragon expert. And in this one, she talks about growing up and the circumstances that made developing her interest possible. It doesn't read like fantasy at all, and I love it. If you have any recommendations like this, please do let me know, because when I'm in need for escapist fiction, this is the type of thing that I look for. And I never know where to go. The distinction between high fantasy and low fantasy is so useless for me. Supposedly, Game of Thrones is high fantasy because it creates its own world. But what I love about Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire is the political aspect, is the historical-ish aspect. It reads very much like a political thriller of sorts, and you still get a lot of the world building. I do like world building. Yeah, if you have something that is sort of like this, please let me know. This is the type of fantasy that you enjoy if you are a nerd in search of escapism. It's basically the key demographic. Mary Brennan is, I think, an anthropologist, so she really knows her stuff in that respect. I don't know, it just reads very real. It feels like historical fiction, but fun because there's fantasy. And I also like the writing. I think the writing is really good. The voice is very convincing. I liked it all the way. A book that I don't know if it's translated to English, but it was translated to Spanish, is Albiñana by Echenoz, which is a novella that I picked up only because it was about a pianist, and the first sentence says something along the lines of, he is very anxious and nervous and he's going to die, but he doesn't know that yet. So that's not why he's anxious and nervous. And I thought that was genius. I really liked it. I loved the descriptions in here of him playing the piano. He plays Chopin concertos, and I just really enjoyed that. But a bit like the hearing trumpet, actually, this also went very crazy. There is a sort of purgatory storyline. I think it was interesting. Where it really went wrong for me was this very profound experience of him being in this purgatory-like space, being contingent or being related to sex with women. Basically, there isn't a lot of further insight, which was disappointing. I was waiting for so much more, but then this sort of fever dream-ish state that the character is in is very much a device to have him sleep with. I don't remember even if it's several women or just one woman, but it became very uninteresting in this way that, I don't know, I just don't understand why all these men think men trying to sleep with women, which at first look kooky or somewhat unattainable or somewhat complex, like the only way they can conquer them is through sex, and that is so depressing. And this is not a new insight, it's old news, but it's just so tiring. This book is not even that old. According to my file here, it says that it was published in 2003. 2003! It was disappointing. I would not recommend it, but I did have fun, I would say, during the first half of the book, where it was all about piano playing and fever dream states and alcoholism and not knowing what was going on in this hotel. Oh, then I need to mention that I read the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. This includes arguably the most famous Sherlock Holmes short story, which is The Final Problem. I buddy read this with Natalie from Curious Reader and Amelia Reads, and I will link their social media down below so you can check them out. This was fun. It's been a very Sherlock Holmes heavy year, much more than I would have expected if it hadn't been because Natalie started this project and we sort of tagged along. But it's been great because it's very low stakes. I think Arthur Conan Doyle really found his stride in the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. I liked most of the stories. A lot of them are perhaps less memorable, but tighter. I really enjoyed the last one, although because it's John telling the tale, and we've had so many great adaptations of these stories, you almost always are left wanting more. Such is the nature of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It is a case where the adaptations have surpassed the books. The books are very nice. They are very fun, and I will continue reading them probably next year, but there's always something that's a bit off. Now, I think that might be because of the medium in which he published. These were serialized, these appeared on periodicals, so the editing process wasn't as intense maybe. And it's also clear that he didn't think ahead about when John is writing these stories. In some stories, you get very clear indications of when John is writing them, but then there are some other stories that sort of negate that, and it doesn't make any sense. So yeah, if you like Sherlock Holmes, you should definitely check out the stories because the spirit is there. The last book I want to tell you about is A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, in which 4 Russians give a master class on writing, reading, and life by George Saunders. This book, all cards on the table. This might be my favorite nonfiction book of the year. It's right up there with Who Was That Man by Neil Bartlett. Objectively speaking, Who Was That Man is the more elevated book. It's a philosophy slash aesthetics slash essays slash memoir. It's on a league of its own. There is no comparison in that respect. This book, on the other hand, is a synthesis of George Saunders' course in Russian short story, which he's taught in Syracuse for 20 years. And he realized he might not teach it ever again, so he wanted to put out this book into the world so us peasants who don't go to Syracuse can experience that class. And thank you, George. Thank you. This book is brilliant. The selection of stories is great. It's written like a class, so each chapter is a short story, and it has a lot of different exercises regarding those short stories. You first read the story and then you get the class, let's say. Except for one, which I won't spoil what it is, but it's an exercise where you don't read the whole story right away. There are no words. George Saunders is a genius. We know this. If you've read Lincoln in the Bardo, you know this. I've also read some of his short stories, but I need to read more. I definitely need to read more by him. I don't know if I'll get to this year, but definitely next year. At the top of my list, authors that I need to read more of, George Saunders. If you like Russian literature or you want to get into Russian literature and you don't know where to start, read this. If you want to feel like you are in a great literature class, read this. If you are an aspiring writer or already a writer and want to improve your craft or reflect on your craft or dissect your craft, especially of course short story, this is about short stories especially, but a lot of the techniques can be extrapolated, but it is focused on short story and it does address the particularities of short stories. It's just so good. I am in awe. I feel about it the same way I felt when I first read So We Read On by Maureen Corrigan, which was my favorite book of last year. I will link to that video down below so you can check it out. And by the way, I will also link to my mid-year freakout tag because there I talked a bit more about Who Was That Man, which is also an amazing book and you should totally check it out if it sounds like your thing because it's amazing. If it doesn't win the top spot, it's definitely my second, or although it's more like 1.5 favorite nonfiction read of the year. But this book is so accessible. That's the thing. How did George Saunders manage to craft a book that is so compulsively readable, that is so funny. I laughed out loud so many times, that has so much of him. It has personal anecdotes, but it's also so knowledgeable and it teaches you so much and it's so didactic. By the way, I didn't know this until recently, but he was an engineer and you can tell because of all the graphs and stuff, which are so helpful, by the way. It reeks of engineering, but in the best of ways, which is a phrase that I never thought I would say. It's just so good. It's just so good. So if you've been hesitant about picking up this book, please pick it up. Eventually, at some point in my life, I want to make a video talking about books that I think you should read if you want to feel like you're studying literature or you want to study literature on your own. I have many recs, but I still want to read a couple more before crafting that. So I don't know. At some point in my life, I'll make that video. But if you're looking for a rec right now, read this. It's just so good. Like with So We Read On is a book that I can only aspire to write at some point in my life. It's just too good. Please read it if it sounds up your alley, because it's worth every penny or every trip to the library or every second you spent reading it. It's just so good. It's one of the best books I have ever read, and it's definitely one of the best books I've read this year, and it will be at the top of my non-fiction favorites list. Will it be number one? I don't know. I read this more recently than Who Was That Man? And we still have Nonfiction November to go, but its chances are pretty good. So that was A Swim in a Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. By the way, I became aware of this book before its release, which never happens. But this is one of those books that I was waiting for. But then I restrained myself from buying it because I wasn't ordering any books online until one day I had to buy a book for the BookTube prize as a physical copy, The Address Book by Deidre Mask. In case you don't know what any of those words mean, I'm going to link the BookTube prize round 2 video so you can catch up on that. But yeah, I took advantage of that opportunity to order this book and I'm so happy I did. Like, my life is significantly better after having read this book. I am a better person and a better writer and a better reader and a better teacher because I have read this. How many books can do that to you? Anyways, that was all for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give a thumbs up, please subscribe and comment. Have you read any of these books? Do you want to read any of these books? Tell me what you read in August or what you've been reading in September. I'm always curious to know. Please don't forget to check out the October pick for the Low-Key Overdue Book Club. I will link that video announcement down below. And on my next video, I will be talking about the rest of the August books. That's all. See you next time. Because you may have watched my review spoiler-free, but